Okay, so for the last concepts video for this week, I want to talk to you about how the theory of environmental justice is being expanded. This is based off this week's reading by Schlossberg, 2013. If you haven't already, I recommend you do complete this reading as it is imperative for your tasks in the tutorials, but also in your assessment tasks. But just to summarize the key ideas here, it focuses on spatially, the concept of environmental justice in terms of space and time. It looks at also the causes of injustice, notions of social justice, and collectivities, and also the non-human world. So these are all the areas in which environmental justice scholarship has been expanded over the years and will continue to expand as we move further along into an era of climate change. So firstly, in terms of spatially, the reading discusses how environmental justice has evolved from its original focus on the unequal distribution of toxic waste and hazardous materials in African American communities in the United States to a much more broader and global movement. So the expansion of environmental justice is not necessarily new, but rather a defining characteristic of the movement itself. So Schlossberg highlights how we are now seeing that this concept of environmental justice is being applied to different countries. Frameworks are now being used to analyse and support movements in various nations outside of the US. But we're also seeing this recognition of the global and transnational nature of environmental injustice. So environmental justice is increasingly understood as a global issue, involving relationships between countries and broader international concerns. Specifically, again, when we look at climate change, we can see how nations in the West are contributing the most environmental pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, various other forms of environmental impacts, and this is disproportionately impacting those in developing nations. So we can see how these environmental justice concerns transcend borders and are in fact transnational in nature. Spatially as well, we're seeing this horizontal diffusion of environmental justice ideas, meanings, and the ways in which the issues are being framed across different regions and social movements. So we're also seeing this vertical extension where the movement of environmental justice is going beyond national borders into international relations to address these global scale environmental problems. Environmental justice is therefore no longer about local or national struggles. It has grown into worldwide discourses that address these global inequalities and transnational environmental challenges, particularly when we look at the connection between colonization and capitalism within the context of environmental injustice. So a key focus in environmental justice scholarship needs to be on the causes of injustice. And so it's fair enough to highlight that these issues are happening, but scholars also need to focus on the multiple systems and inequities that shape environmental damage and affect people. So what we've started to notice in the EJ space is that there is a focus of the structural nature of environmental injustice. So we can tie environmental justice to broader issues of systematic oppression based on racism, and the expansion of development ideologies founded in colonization and capitalism, but also in consumerism and anthropocentric values that frame our culture in Western industrialized nations that obviously impact those in the global south. We also can look at the evolution of imperialism as a policy and ideology that has contributed to environmental justices in the global south and in other colonized nations such as Australia. We can also see how legal disenfranchisement, such as issues of land rights in Australia that come from the notion of terra nullius, have modern day consequences in terms of the land rights and environmental justice concerns faced by Australian First Nations people. So we can again see how these all are based on these structural inequities that exist outside of environmental justice concerns and are embedded within broader social justice focuses that we see in this discipline. Another key idea presented by Schlossberg was that environmental justice is often being approached from multiple lenses that have been used to understand and argue for changes to various environmental injustices and systematic issues. So we can see that there is a focus on distributive justice, or the unequal distribution of society's environmental risks, impacts and benefits. But we've also seen an emergence of procedural pursuits of environmental justice that focuses on the underlying social, political and economic processes by which goods are allocated and environmental decisions are made. There's also been a focus in recent years between EJ scholars and activists to highlight how environmental regulations are developed unfairly through laws and systems of governments that allow for these unequal practices to be enforced. Then there's also a focus on restorative justice, which seeks to hold those in power, such as our regulators, our corporations, etc., to hold responsibility for their actions and to explain and make more transparent their decisions, to understand how environmental wrongs can be rectified. And this sense of environmental justice, or restorative justice from an environmental lens, focuses on how people in power could be held accountable for future and current environmental injustices. That is a key concern of intergenerational environmental justice that we'll talk about shortly. Specifically when we look at how we can protect future generations from climate change. Embedding all of these ideas are notions of human rights, of participation, and also who has voice. So you can see these broader social justice and sociological ideas being embedded within the practice and the focus of environmental justice. A key thing that sets environmental justice activism and theory apart from other notions of social justice is that it's not just justice for individuals. It moves beyond an individual focus of justice to look at justice for the whole community, for justice for whole groups of people, even justice for generations who have yet to be born under the issues of climate change. So it looks at how environmental justice impacts the cohesiveness and running of communities, not just for people, but for peoples. So not just thinking in terms of the individual level, but thinking in terms of the collective. How are the decisions being made about the environment impacting communities of people? How are they going to continue to impact communities of people now into the future? And that's something that we're seeing being questioned in the environmental justice space as well, is looking beyond the present to looking at into the future. How will climate change impact those who have yet to be born, who have yet to vote? Thinking beyond the current to a very much in the future time span where the destruction of the Anthropocene will see the furthering frequency of disasters, the furthering degradation of our natural resources to impact those who had no voice or decision at the present. Schlossberg highlights that there are ongoing challenges for environmental justice theory, particularly if we are to expand the discourse of environmental justice to fit in with a more modern day lens of justice. And that includes the need to strengthen the connection of the environment itself. So rather than focusing solely on human-centered issues, which environmental justice theory has done, moving beyond that to emphasize how environmental harm not only affects people, but affects all living things. And this multi-species justice approach is considered to be necessary to expand discourse in this field to fit in with these more modern conceptions of ecocentrism and move beyond anthropocentrism. And this is under the idea that nature, ecosystems, and non-human life forms should be considered within the framework of justice, not just as factors that influence human well-being, but as entities in and of themselves which deserve protection and equality in environmental justice pursuits. And lastly, I just wanted to flag the idea of intergenerational justice, which refers to the ethical principle that current generations have a responsibility to consider and protect the rights and well-being of future generations. And this will be discussed in relation to climate change and environmental sustainability in the coming weeks in tutorials and also the lecture. So this core idea needs to be flagged as something that should be a part of modern day environmental justice discourse. And again, you will be looking at it a little bit further in this week's tutorial and next week's lecture. Thank you everybody for listening to this and for having me here today to talk to you about concepts of environmental justice. And I look forward to seeing you when I do my next guest lecture in a few weeks on disaster justice. Thank you.